Olenna Tyrell had always been more formidable than anyone cared to admit, and on the day Jaime Lannister offered her the poisoned wine in the High Tower of Highgarden, she revealed yet again the steel beneath her gentle smiles and witty barbs. As she brought the goblet to her lips, the bitterness of her regrets welled up in her throat. But Olenna was no fool. She had guessed there might be poison, for she understood the nature of Cersei Lannister's brood. She downed it all, or seemed to, and feigned her final choking breath. Jaime, convinced that his duty was done, left her to die. The last he saw was the Lady of Highgarden slumped at her table, eyes filmed with finality, all regal bearing collapsed into sorrow. But the Queen of Thorns was never one to be outmaneuvered easily. She had prepared for this eventuality. Discreetly, she had employed a loyal retainer to brew a special concoction, an antidote that would buy her precious time, enough to appear dead to any onlooker, but not enough to save her from the edges of the poison's effect forever. Her agent was a skilled apothecary who had studied under the maesters in Old Town, one who specialized in the quiet arts of subterfuge and subtle potions. From him she had gained a small vial, disguised in a ring upon her finger, its contents capable of giving the illusion of death. The effort nearly failed. The taste of the real poison scorched her tongue, sending waves of agony through her frail bones. Her heartbeat rattled in her ears like a distant war drum. She was minutes from true death when the ring's pin pricked her skin, injecting just enough of the antidote into her bloodstream to stabilize her. Her retainer, a gray-faced man in simple robes, retrieved her from the tower in secret while the Lannister forces prepared to depart. Men see what they expect to see, and no one expected the Lady of Highgarden to rise from the dead. By the time the sun set behind the tall spires, Olenna Tyrell was gone, carried by a litter through forgotten passages deep beneath the castle she had once commanded. When she awoke that night, her first coherent thought was of Marjorie, and a pang of immeasurable grief broke through her chest. The memory of her granddaughter's death was a brand upon her heart, a pain that motivated every single one of Olenna's coming actions. She would not let the Tyrell name fade away. If it took every last ounce of cunning within her, she would see the downfall of those who had destroyed her kin. She could still taste the bitter tang of poison at the back of her throat, a constant reminder that time was short. She was an old woman battered by the storms of war and treachery, and her body would not hold out forever. Yet she had a mind sharper than any Valyrian steel and the ruthless determination to match. Word would soon spread across Westeros that the Lady of Highgarden was dead. Even so, rumors never cease, and one whisper in the right ear might append the Lannisters' carefully painted portrait of triumph. Olenna needed allies. She needed ears and eyes in every corner of the Seven Kingdoms, from the stony shores of the north to the sun-baked sands of Dorne. The greatest advantage she had now was that everyone believed her to be gone, and in that presumed absence she could sow the seeds of revenge. Under cover of darkness, her retainer brought her to a secluded manor nestled between Highgarden's outer farms. It had once belonged to a distant branch of House Tyrell, lesser cousins who mostly bred horses and tended orchards. With war raging and the Tyrell fortunes seemingly collapsed, the place had been abandoned for months. The small folk had fled or been conscripted, leaving behind a silent estate overgrown with weeds. There, in a shuttered solar, Olenna lay in a bed of old straw and worn linens, trembling as the dregs of the poison still ravaged her body. She would recover, she told herself, though she had lost much of her vigor. Her mind was intact, and that was enough to begin plotting. She had no illusions about her ability to rally an army. The Reach was firmly under the Lannisters' boot. Cersei had wasted no time seizing whatever spoils she could from the once bountiful lands. Their granaries, their gold, their storied seats of power, all of it was now under the lion's paw. But even in that darkness, Olenna knew how to exploit cracks in an overlord's armor. The small folk might despise her for failing to protect them. Or perhaps they might be hungry for guidance, hungry for that legendary Tyrell generosity that once kept bellies full all across the Reach. She began by summoning the handful of loyal retainers who had escaped the carnage. Maester Thomos had once served the lesser Tyrell line and was now the sole caretaker of the estate. He fussed over Olenna, measuring out potions and herbal remedies, cautioning her to rest. She only scoffed. Rest? While Cersei Lannister sits on the Iron Throne, her monstrous brood laying waste to all that remains of my house, she snapped, voice rasping with the dryness in her throat. I have work to do, Maester. He bowed his head, pressing a damp cloth to her forehead. As you wish, my lady. But do not let hatred cloud your senses. You need all your strength. My strength, Olenna said, forcing a wry smile, lies here. She tapped a bony finger against her temple. Gather quills and parchment. We're going to put that old Raven loft to good use. I have letters to send. Urgent letters to Dorne, to the Riverlands, and yes, even beyond the Narrow Sea. With these words, she set her plan in motion. No sigils would adorn the missives. They would be penned in code with references only her most trusted allies would unravel. A whisper to Ilaria Sand's loyalists, if any remained. A plea to certain Tully sympathizers who had harbored grudges against the Freys and the Lannisters. A secret note to the Iron Bank, for Olenna understood that wars are not fought by swords alone, but by coin. She would remind them of the Tyrell gold that had once filled King's Landing's coffers. Perhaps now they would see how precarious the Lannister hold truly was. The first raven flew on a moonless night, gliding over fields swaying with half-harvested crops. Olenna watched from a dusty window, pale hand resting on the sill. She was still too weak to stand for long, and the swirling dust made her cough. But within her fragile frame, a spark of fierce determination burned brighter than ever. It would take time for her entreaties to bear fruit, and time was a luxury she did not truly possess. She was old, and the antidote only provided a reprieve, not a cure. She had to be strategic, cunning, and swift. If she had survived the poison, it was for one purpose alone, to shatter the Lannisters' facade and expose their treachery for all the realm to see. And so, on that night, Olenna Tyrell, the last of her name with any real claim to power, began her final game of thorns. She would not rely on armies or knights in shining armor. She would rely on secrets, alliances, and the long reach of vengeance. Through her webs of influence, she would craft the downfall of the Iron Throne's new occupant, that cold-eyed lioness in King's Landing. If she must do it alone, then so be it. But she suspected she was not entirely without friends. In the labyrinth of Westerosi politics, where grudges were kept like prized relics, many had cause to resent the Lannisters. All it would take was a gentle nudge, a carefully woven rumor, or a sudden revelation at court. Olenna knew that for every seemingly invincible empire, there was a tiny weakness, a hairline crack that could splinter the entire foundation. As she collapsed back into bed, her heart thudding painfully in her chest, she allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. She had cheated death for this. Let the Lannisters think themselves victorious. Let them prance about in their golden halls, drenched in the illusions of power. Somewhere in the darkness, the Queen of Thorns was gathering her strength, and she would make them pay for every drop of Tyrell blood they had spilled. In the weeks that followed, whispers moved across the Seven Kingdoms like an invisible tide. The ravens Olenna had sent flitted from rookery to rookery, delivering riddling messages to those she believed would still stand against Lannister tyranny or who could be bought to do so. Some letters promised gold, others vengeance, and a few appealed to old loyalties that had been bruised but never fully broken. If she could rally even a fraction of these potential allies, the cracks in the Lannisters' rule would widen. While her network stirred, Olenna huddled in the dimly lit solar of that forgotten manor, slowly regaining her strength. Maester Thomos insisted on daily teas, pungent with healing herbs which left her drowsy. But she endured, forcing herself to remain awake, penning more letters whenever her mind was clear. She refused to relinquish control of this operation to anyone else. She was the last true Tyrell with cunning enough to see it through. Now and then, in her feverish dreams, she saw Marjorie in a wedding gown, the bells chiming in King's Landing, Joffrey's sadistic grin turning to purple-faced horror. She remembered the moment she'd slipped the poison into his cup with deft fingers. A necessary deed, for the good of the realm, or so she believed. Yet that victory was short-lived, because in the end, the Lannisters had turned their vengeance on her precious granddaughter. Olenna awoke with tears burning her cheeks, her breath ragged. She clutched at her sheets and muttered the same words over and over, "I will avenge you." At last, a reply came. One raven returned bearing a single scrap of parchment marked only by a crude sigil, a sun pierced by a spear. The symbol of Dorne. Olenna's heart seized with a sudden flutter of hope. She had half expected the Dornish to spurn her, given that the Sand Snakes had been routed after their ill-fated coup. But the letter merely read, "All is not lost. The lioness bleeds, even if the wound is hidden." There was no signature, yet it was enough. She ordered Maester Thomos to prepare for a journey south. The man balked at first, insisting she was too weak to travel. But Olenna pointed out that if she stayed, her conspirators would have to trek to her, endangering them all. Better for her to move quietly, disguised and accompanied by only the retainer who had saved her from Highgarden. The smaller the group, the less likely they'd draw attention. And so, under cover of a cloudy dawn, Olenna Tyrell, wrapped in threadbare cloaks, departed the manor on a small wagon pulled by a single horse. They avoided main roads, steering clear of Lannister patrols that roamed the Reach. With Highgarden fallen, the presence of gold and crimson cloaks had become a grim fact of everyday life. Yet the small folk, while wary, had little love for their new overlords. More than once, villagers offered Olenna and her retainer bread or water, though no one recognized the stooped, elderly woman as the Queen of Thorns. She played her part well, a frail old grandmother, eyes clouded with cataracts, traveling to meet distant family. People pitied her or ignored her, which served perfectly. Their path took them through backwoods trails, across shallow streams, and finally along the edge of the red mountains that bordered Dorne. The air grew hot, the sun searing down. Olenna felt her body protest at the harsh conditions, her bones ached, and her head often spun from dehydration. Still, she refused to slow. Each step brought her closer to a place where Lannisters held no direct power, a realm known for its fierce independence and simmering grudges. The retainer guided them to an abandoned outpost once used by Dornish scouts. There, they were met by three figures, their faces obscured by veils and hoods. One stepped forward, raising a hand in cautious greeting. In the other hand was a dagger, glinting in the dusty light. "Lady Tyrell," the figure said in a hushed voice. "We weren't sure you'd come." Olenna coughed, leaning on a wooden staff. "I'd sooner march myself into the Seven Hells than remain under Lannister boots. Besides, I hear you Dornish have a taste for vengeance that rivals mine." The figure removed her veil, an older woman, skin bronzed by the sun, lines of sorrow and anger etched around her eyes. "I serve those loyal to Ellaria, though she herself has met a fate at Cersei's hands. Dorne is in chaos, but pockets of resistance remain. The sands are vast, we can hide where the Iron Throne's men cannot follow." Olenna fixed her with a sharp gaze. "Chaos is an opportunity. Cersei is no fool, but she's spread too thin. Her enemies multiply. Even if she secures the Iron Throne, her hold is tenuous. We must press that weakness." The woman nodded slowly. "Many blame House Tyrell for entangling our house in that ill-fated alliance. But others remember the days when Dorne and Highgarden shared more cordial ties. You ask for help to bring down the Lannisters, some are willing to listen if only to avenge the Martells." "Vengeance," Olenna said, letting the word linger in the dusty air. "We share the cause. Tell me your name." "I am Arella Sand, once a handmaiden to Ellaria. Now I lead a band of rebels who refuse to bend to the lion." "Good. Then take me to them," Olenna said simply. Arella hesitated. "You're in no condition for long journeys, my lady." "I didn't come all this way to lounge in a dusty outpost," Olenna snapped, though her voice trembled with fatigue. "Take me to your gathering place, wherever it is. We have plans to make." And so they continued deeper into the deserts of Dorne, traveling by night to avoid the sun's merciless glare. Olenna found the nights chilling, her thin blood ill-suited for such temperature swings. Yet each morning, she awoke with renewed resolve. The antidote still worked through her veins, but she felt the creeping toll of the poison's residue. She forced herself onward, clinging to her staff, relying on the retainer's arm for balance. They came at last to a hidden oasis, encircled by jagged rock formations and tall, swaying palms. Tents of muted colors blended with the surroundings, and scattered among them were perhaps a score of men and women, each sporting the lean, sinewy look of those hardened by desert life. When the group arrived, some rebels eyed Olenna warily, while others peered at her with a flicker of respect. In the largest tent, Arella introduced Olenna to the other leaders of the resistance, grim-faced veterans who had fought for the Martells, a few younger hotheads burning with the desire to strike back. Olenna did not stand on ceremony. She sank onto a cushion, swirling dust motes dancing in a beam of sunlight, and spoke in a low, urgent tone. She explained what she had seen, how she had survived, and the precarious nature of Cersei's control. She told them of Lannister outrages in the Reach, the forced requisitions, and the hollow promises they made to keep the peace. She dangled the prospect of toppling the Lannisters for good. "We must unite," she urged them, her voice fierce despite her frailty. "The North is in turmoil, the Riverlands are uncertain, but Dorne and the Reach have always been proud realms. Each of us has suffered at the hands of the Lion. Now is the time to strike. We can expose their crimes, one by one, for all of Westeros to see." A muscular youth with sun-bleached hair scoffed. "What good are words? We lack armies, and the Lannisters have the Iron Throne. They can crush us like insects." Olenna met his gaze with an icy stare. "Armies can be bought or broken, but a realm's faith in its monarch? That is fragile. If we make it clear that the Lannisters' rule is built on murder, lies, and illegitimacy, that faith will crumble. Support will vanish. The Iron Throne will find itself deserted by allies. And then even a band of desert rebels could bring it down." Murmurs rippled through the tent. Arella placed a calming hand in the air. "We have small but meaningful means, my lady. Our spies in King's Landing say the city is restless. King's Landing bleeds gold to maintain the Red Keep and the armies, but the common folk see little benefit. Tensions rise with each new tax. Perhaps we could stoke those flames. Precisely, Olenna said. Stoke them. Spread rumors, but ground them in truth. Let the people learn of how Tommen died, how Marjorie died, how the September was blown to rubble by wildfire. Let them recall who set the events in motion, the same woman who now sits upon the throne. And then, once the anger peaks, we strike with undeniable proof. Documents, testimonies, perhaps a surviving witness or two. We must show that everything the Lannisters have touched reeks of betrayal. Yes, whispered an older man, his scarred cheek reminiscent of half-forgotten battles. But how to gather such proof? Olenna's eyes glinted. Leave that to me. I still have contacts in King's Landing. A spider, if you will, who once spun webs across the city. He may be out of favor, but his whispers remain. If any living soul holds incriminating secrets about the Lannisters, he does. We'll lure him out. She thought of Varys, the master of whisperers who had disappeared from court not so long ago. Though she wasn't certain of his current whereabouts, she suspected he might be drawn to any cause that promised to dethrone Cersei. But for now, she kept this detail private. Loose lips sank ships, and in this delicate stage, secrecy was paramount. Over the following days, Olenna and the Dornish rebels hammered out a plan. They would coordinate with the scattered remnants of House Martell's loyalists. Quietly, they would spread seeds of dissent in towns and villages. Horsemen would ride along the borders, distributing coded messages to discontented lords who might remember the prosperity the Reach once shared with Dorne before the Lannisters' iron grip. It was not a guarantee, but it was the start of a grand design. All the while, Olenna wrestled with her own weakening health. She felt the poison's echo in her bones. Sometimes her vision blurred or her hands trembled. She pressed Maester Thomos for more of the antidote, but his supplies were limited. He cautioned her to go slow, yet she refused to yield. Each day that passed was another day the Lannisters consolidated their power. She had to be faster, sharper, more relentless. Eventually, she was ready to leave the oasis. Her next destination would be even riskier, King's Landing itself. If she was to unearth the truth that would damn the Lannisters, she needed to go to the heart of their empire. The Dornish rebels balked at the idea, urging her to wait until they had more support. But she waved away their concerns with a shaky hand. The best place to conceal a secret, she said, is in plain sight. Let them believe I'm dead. I will walk among them unseen, as I did traveling here. Old women are invisible to the proud and powerful. They won't suspect. Besides, how else can I find the proof we need? With that, plans were laid for her secret infiltration of the capital. She would travel with minimal escort, slipping in as one of the countless refugees seeking respite. The city was always in flux, with peasants streaming through the gates in search of food or work. Under a new identity, Olenna could vanish among them. Before she left, Arella Sand took her hand. "If you survive this, my lady," the Dornish woman said quietly, "I hope you live to see the day your enemies stand trial for their crimes." Olenna's lips quirked in a tight smile. "Trial or no trial, I want them ruined. Cersei, Jaime, all who laughed while my house burned. May they taste the ashes of all they've taken." And so the N of Thorns departed the desert, defiant and unbroken. Dorne's searing winds bore witness to the start of an audacious gambit, one that could shape the fate of the realm. Though her steps were uneven, her will was iron. If this was to be her final battle, she would wage it with every scrap of cunning left in her. She had outlived her children, her grandchildren, and countless enemies. She had endured a poison meant to silence her forever. By the seven, she would not go gently into oblivion. Her wagon rattled along a winding path, heading north once more toward the great city where the Iron Throne loomed. The memory of the Red Keep's cold stone halls and whispered conspiracies filled her mind. She pictured the throne room with its pillars of twisted swords and the faint echo of courtly politicking. Even from afar, she could sense the stench of fear and ambition that clung to those walls. In that viper's nest, she would strike the final blow, ensuring the realm learned the full truth of what had transpired. In the dying light of another scorching day, Olenna Tyrell looked out at the horizon and thought of Marjorie. She pictured her granddaughter's bright smile, her compassionate heart, and the monstrous injustice that had snuffed out that light. Rage and sorrow mingled in the old woman's chest, hardening into a single resolve. She whispered into the hot air, "This is for you, my sweet girl. I promise I will not fail." The journey to King's Landing took longer than Olenna anticipated. Roads were crammed with refugees fleeing the aftermath of war, and the Lannisters' ever-watchful patrols searched for any sign of dissidence. Under her ragged cloak, Olenna blended with the throngs of common folk, just another bent-backed crone clinging to life in a realm growing more precarious by the day. As the city finally came into view, its familiar silhouette rose over the horizon. The Red Keep loomed in the distance, its walls tinted by the fading light of dusk. Memories clawed at Olenna's heart. This was the place where Marjorie had reigned as queen, if only briefly. This was where the faith militant had paraded her granddaughter through the streets, where the Great September had erupted in green flame, where countless betrayals had simmered and boiled over. Olenna felt both revulsion and a dark determination. She bowed her head, letting the hood's shadow conceal her face. The line at the city gates was long, merchants arguing with gold cloaks, peasants pleading for entry. She kept her eyes on the dirt underfoot, stepping forward as the mass inched along. At last, a bored guard in tarnished armor waved her through without more than a cursory glance. Once inside, she was assaulted by the stench of King's Landing, the reek of waste, fish, unwashed bodies, and the faint metallic tang of impending trouble. The crowds pressed in from all sides, a swirl of desperation and petty commerce. Olenna forced herself to remain calm. She had a mission that required her to stay alive and unnoticed. Navigating the labyrinth of streets, she passed brothels with chipped paint, taverns emanating raucous laughter, and beggars slumped in alleys. She had arranged a rendezvous with a contact of uncertain loyalty, a former informant who once served the Tyrells by funneling bits of gossip from Flea Bottom. The coded letter she'd dispatched weeks ago indicated he would meet her in a derelict stable near the Street of Flower. She found the place easily. Time had eroded what little structure remained, the roof sagged, and the stable doors hung crooked on rusted hinges. The interior was dim, lit by pale shafts of moonlight through cracks in the roof. She detected movement in the shadows. Someone else was here, breathing softly in the gloom. "Lady Tyrell?" The whisper came from a slender figure draped in a patched cloak. The voice, hushed and male, carried a tremor of uncertainty. Olenna let the hood fall back just enough to reveal the lines of her face. "You said you had information. Let's not waste time." Her contact dipped his head in what might have been a bow. "I am Derry. I helped your granddaughter smuggle food to the poor once, a long time ago, before everything fell apart." There was a note of sadness in his tone. "I never forgot her kindness." "Then prove your loyalty to her memory now," Olenna said, voice sharp. "I need to know about Cersei's vulnerabilities. News of the crown's finances, the city's morale, any recent moves to stamp out rebellion." Derry exhaled shakily. "It's all connected, my lady. The gold is running dry. Word is that the Iron Bank is pressing for repayment. The city is on edge, more so than usual. Cersei's personal guard roams the streets after dusk, rounding up anyone they suspect of sedition. They're cracking down hard. Folks are scared." Olenna braced herself on her staff. "That's to be expected. I need something more concrete, something that can turn the realm against her." He licked his lips. "There's talk that that she's begun executing potential threats quietly. Former courtiers, lesser nobles who once supported the Tyrells, even old members of the faith militant who survived. She has no trust in anyone. But she's left a trail of bodies. Someone might link them all back to her. I've also heard a rumor, an odd one, about a stash of letters hidden in the Red Keep's dungeons. Some say it's correspondence from the late Pycelle, or perhaps from even older conspiracies detailing every bribe, betrayal, and secret the crown ever kept. If such letters exist, they'd be deadly in the right hands." Olenna's breath caught. Documents in the Red Keep could be the key to toppling Cersei's fragile rule. If she could get her hands on incontrovertible proof of the Lannisters' crimes, affairs, murders, deals with enemies of the realm would erupt in outrage. But retrieving them would be a suicidal endeavor for most. She studied Derry's face, half hidden in the gloom. "Do you know where in the dungeons?" He shook his head, frustration creeping into his voice. "No, only that they're in a heavily guarded section. Some call it the Black Vault. The rumors say Qyburn uses it for his experiments. Unholy things. If you want to confirm, you'll need someone with real access or the means to sneak in." A chill raced up Olenna's spine at the mention of Qyburn. She remembered how he'd resurrected the mountain, turning him into that lumbering, silent monstrosity. But fear was a luxury she could not afford. "Then I'll need to find a way. Keep listening, Derry. If anything changes, leave a mark, a small chalk rose on the corner of the Street of Silk. I'll send someone to check." He nodded, relief evident. "Understood, my lady. And I'm sorry for what happened to your house." To the Queen, Olenna cut him off. "We live in an age of monsters, Derry. Save your sympathy for those who can still be protected." They parted ways and she slipped back into the winding alleys. The prospect of infiltrating the Red Keep to uncover hidden letters seemed daunting, yet her mind spun with the possibilities. An unsmiling starless sky greeted her when she emerged onto a broader street, and she pulled her cloak tight against the chill. She prayed that the night concealed her well enough. Her next step was to contact Varys if he was indeed lurking somewhere in the city. The spider often had a knack for appearing just when the realm's fate teetered on a knife's edge. But he was elusive, and her usual channels had gone silent. Nonetheless, she had an inkling of where to leave a message. She made her way to a narrow building in Flea Bottom, once known for hosting clandestine meetings. On the rotting back door, she scratched a small mark with the tip of a dagger, a coded symbol that the spider would recognize if he still had his little birds in the city. Then she waited. Days stretched on, each more tense than the last. She rented a tiny room above a butcher's shop, the stench of stale blood permeating her clothing. She kept her hood drawn, speaking to no one. Twice, gold cloaks banged on doors throughout the street, searching for some hidden culprit. She pressed herself into the shadows, the old boards creaking beneath her, heart pounding like a war drum. At last, a response came, or so she presumed. One morning, as she hobbled through a squalid alley, an urchin brushed past her. She heard a soft whisper, "Tonight, the cellar behind the purple fish brothel." Then the child vanished into the throng. That evening, Olenna mustered what little strength she had and made her way to the appointed spot. The brothel's sign was chipped and barely legible, but the swirling script indeed read "Purple Fish." It was an unremarkable building near the waterfront, reeking of stale ale and sweat. Behind it was a cramped courtyard with a rickety ladder leading down to what might have once been a storeroom or an abandoned cistern. She descended carefully, the ladders wood protesting under her slight weight. The space below was dark, water dripping from the stone ceiling. A single candle burned on the floor, illuminating a figure draped in dark robes. As she approached, the figure turned, revealing the smooth, bald head and faintly amused expression of Lord Varys. "My dear Lady Olenna," he said, voice echoing gently. "I've heard rumors of your demise." Olenna allowed herself a thin, mirthless smile. "Rumors are tools, my lord. You, of all people, should know that." He inclined his head. "Quite so. I thought it prudent to stay out of sight while our dear Queen Cersei tightens her grip on the city. It's refreshing to see a familiar face, even if that face scowls at me." "Don't be coy," Olenna snapped, though her tone lacked true venom. "I'm too old for pleasantries. You know why I'm here. The Lannisters have to be brought down. I'm told there's a cache of incriminating letters hidden in the Red Keep, possibly in Qyburn's territory." Varys's eyes flickered with interest. "Ah, the Black Vault. A dangerous place indeed. Qyburn has turned it into a warren of locked chambers, each filled with the unspeakable. Retrieving anything from there would be no small feat." "That's why I need your help," Olenna said. "Your talents for stealth and subterfuge could prove invaluable." He drew a measured breath. "I'm no longer the master of whisperers. My influence has waned. Yet I do have a few birds left who still chirp in the shadows. If these letters exist, and if we can get them, they might contain enough dirt on the Lannisters to convince even their staunchest allies that Cersei's reign is untenable." Olenna's expression hardened. Might. We can't rely on vague possibilities. I need certainty." Varys tilted his head. "That certainty comes at a cost. I know a secret passage or two, but the mountain guards Qyburn's domain, and the dungeons are riddled with illusions and traps. A direct approach would be suicidal. We need cunning and perhaps a little chaos to draw attention away from our endeavor." "Chaos is one of my specialties," Olenna said, her voice low. "What do you propose?" A faint smile curved his lips. "A spark in the city. Something to occupy the gold cloaks while we slip into the Red Keep. Perhaps a rumor of an imminent uprising, a staged riot in Flea Bottom. That should scatter the guards long enough for us to act. Once inside, we'll need to rely on a precise plan." Olenna nodded. "Time is not on our side. I can coordinate with a few Dornish sympathizers to stir trouble. Dorne thirsts for Lannister blood. They'll have no qualms about inciting panic." "Very well," Varys said. "I'll gather my birds. In 2 nights, be ready. We'll attempt the infiltration under cover of darkness. Best we meet here again just after the sun sets." She studied the man's face, searching for any hint of betrayal. But Varys was as inscrutable as ever. "I will be here," she said at last. "But if you dare cross me..." His laugh was soft, strangely mournful. "My lady, crossing you would be the last mistake I'd ever make. No, I serve the realm. And if the realm is best served by exposing the Lannisters' wickedness, then that is precisely what I intend to do." They parted, leaving Olenna to climb the ladder back into the night. She could feel her pulse hammering as she walked away from the brothel's back lot, her staff tapping against the cobblestones. The old poison still crawled through her veins, threatening to sap her strength. But she refused to let it. For Marjorie, for Loras, for the Reach, she would see this through. The next day, she made discreet contact with the Dornish rebels hidden in the city. They were a ragtag handful, but they possessed a fiery hatred for the crown. She instructed them to spread word of a secret meeting of royal dissenters in Flea Bottom. The rumor would be thick with false details, designed to lure the gold cloaks into a wild chase. Quiet bribes to certain unscrupulous types guaranteed enough foot soldiers to make the ruse convincing. Night descended on King's Landing like a predator stalking its prey. Olenna arrived at the watery cellar, her heart thrumming with anticipation and a touch of dread. Varys was already there, candlelight dancing across his robe. He offered a slight bow. "My birds are in place. The riot should begin shortly. We must move swiftly once it does." Outside, a shout rose in the distance, followed by clanging metal and the roar of an agitated crowd. Screams echoed, interspersed with the barked commands of gold cloaks. "That's our cue," Olenna muttered. They slipped from the cellar like wraiths, winding through narrow alleyways toward a seldom-used gate leading into the Red Keep's courtyard. Varys led the way, his footsteps soundless on the worn stones. They passed fewer guards than Olenna had expected, already pulled to quell the disturbance, no doubt. The fortress loomed above them, its walls casting long shadows in the moonlight. They reached a small postern gate. The lock was rusted, and Varys produced a slender tool from his sleeve, working silently until the gate creaked open. Inside was a dim corridor, the air cool and stale. They hurried along, with Varys occasionally pausing to listen for any sign of patrols. Twice, they flattened themselves against the wall as helmeted guards rushed by, their footsteps echoing ominously. Deeper and deeper they descended, leaving behind the more familiar passageways. The flickering torches gave way to dank darkness. The stone walls seemed to close in, dripping with moisture. Olenna's breath grew labored, partly from exertion, partly from the oppressive sense of dread that clung to these halls. At last, they halted before a thick iron door. A skull motif had been carved into its surface, a testament to Qyburn's macabre inclinations. Varys's whisper was nearly lost in the echoing gloom. "We must be quick. This is the entrance to the Black Vault." Olenna steeled herself. She glanced over her shoulder at the labyrinth they'd navigated. If they failed, there would be no escape. With shaking hands, she reached out, pushing the iron door. It groaned on its hinges, revealing a corridor lined with cells and side chambers. Strange apparatuses littered the floor, broken cages, iron chairs with restraints, racks of dusty scrolls. A nauseating smell filled her nostrils, making her stomach churn. She had witnessed horrors in her time, but the aura of this place was beyond unnerving. They moved carefully, scanning each chamber for any sign of the rumored cache of letters. Distant moans echoed, whether from living creatures or trapped spirits, Olenna could not tell. With each step, her mouth felt drier. Her eyes darted to every shadow, expecting Qyburn's monstrous creation, Sir Robert Strong, the Undead Mountain, to appear at any moment. In a cramped alcove, Varys stumbled upon a heavy chest secured by an ornate lock. He beckoned Olenna over. "This, it has Qyburn's seal. Let's see what secrets he's hoarding." He fiddled with his picking tool. After a few agonizing moments, the lock clicked open. Inside were scrolls stacked in neat bundles, their wax seals bearing various sigils. Lannister, Baratheon, even some Targaryen marks from ages past. They sifted through them, eyes widening at the revelations scrawled on parchment. Detailed accounts of bribes paid to the faith militants' leaders, letters discussing the orchestration of the charges against Marjorie and Loras, documents suggesting the Lannisters had secretly funded raids in the Riverlands to weaken potential adversaries. And at the bottom, a set of letters bearing the seal of King Robert Baratheon, all addressed to Tywin Lannister, referencing debts and arrangements that hinted at deeper conspiracies behind the throne. Olenna's hand trembled as she lifted a particularly damning letter signed by Cersei herself. It discussed the use of wildfire beneath the Great September, proof that the destruction had been premeditated, not an act of desperation but a cold, calculated massacre. This alone could turn the realm against her if it were made public. She looked to Varys, whose expression had grown grim. "This is it," she whispered. This will ruin them. Before he could reply, a heavy footstep echoed down the corridor. The torchlight flickered, revealing a hulking shadow. Olenna's blood ran cold. The monstrous form of Sir Robert Strong lumbered forward, red eyes gleaming through the visor of his helm. The undead mountain had found them. Varys jerked his head toward a side chamber. Quickly, they snatched as many incriminating scrolls as they could carry, stuffing them into sacks. The creature advanced, armor scraping against the stone. Olenna's heart hammered. She could almost feel the vibrations of his footsteps reverberating through her brittle bones. They darted into the side chamber, shutting the door behind them. She heard a low growl, an inhuman sound that sent a jolt of terror through her. The door shuddered as the hulking knight slammed his fist against it. Varys scanned the walls, frantically searching for an escape route. There, he hissed, pointing to a grate in the floor. It was small, barely large enough to crawl through. He hurried over, prying at it with trembling fingers. Olenna clutched the sack of documents to her chest, breath rattling. Any moment now, the door would give. With a final yank, Varys freed the grate, revealing a narrow tunnel that reeked of stagnant water. "In you go, my lady," he whispered, urgency sharpening his tone. She did not hesitate. Squeezing through the opening, she descended into the cold darkness, the sack of scrolls gripped tight. Varys followed, replacing the grate as best he could. The tunnel was barely high enough for them to crawl. Above, they heard the door splinter under the mountain's blows. Fear spurred them onward. They crawled for what felt like an eternity, guided only by the watery glimmers of moonlight seeping through cracks in the stone. The passage twisted and turned. More than once, Olenna nearly gagged on the foul water soaking her skirts. Eventually, the tunnel sloped upward, culminating in a rusted hatch. Varys pushed it open, and they emerged in the foundation of an old guard tower near the outer walls. Panting, Olenna leaned against a damp wall, her knees threatening to buckle. Varys, equally shaken, clutched his side. But the scrolls were still in their possession. That single fact gave Olenna the strength to press on. Together, they slipped out of the guard tower and into the windy night. The starlight seemed impossibly bright after the pitch blackness of the vault. Distant shouts echoed from the city. The staged riot was still underway, or perhaps had intensified. Gold cloaks sprinted across the courtyard, but none noticed the two figures, shuffling quietly against the fortress walls, melting into the shadows. With careful steps, they crept away from the Red Keep, eventually melting back into the tangled streets of King's Landing. Only when they reached the hidden cellar behind the Purple Fish did they dare pause for breath. Olenna clutched the documents, relief mingling with triumph. "We have them," she rasped. "All the proof we need. Murder, conspiracy, regicide. Cersei's entire reign is built on lies." Varys nodded, his expression exhausted yet resolute. "Distributing them will be our next challenge. If we simply hand them to the common folk, it may not carry the weight we need. We require the support of significant houses, the faith, and perhaps even the Iron Bank." "We'll do it carefully," Olenna said. "A piece here, a piece there. We'll let the realm see the truth, bit by bit, until the clamor for justice is deafening." She allowed herself the ghost of a smile. She thought of Marjorie, of the vengeance that was nearly within reach. Cersei would face the reckoning she deserved. The day was coming when the lioness would be dragged from her ill-gotten throne, exposed for the vile creature she was. And then, when the realm rose against the Lannisters, Olenna Tyrell, the old Queen of Thorns, would finally rest, knowing her granddaughter had been avenged. For tonight, at least, they had won a small but crucial victory. And sometimes, in a world as dark as theirs, a single victory was all it took to ignite the spark that could burn an empire to the ground. Olenna's heart still drummed with the echoes of their daring escape. She pressed one hand to her chest, feeling the frantic thud beneath the lace of her bodice, and marveled that an old woman could still survive such a perilous venture. Varys blew out a breath and wiped his brow, then used the hem of his robe to dab a shallow cut on his palm. He must have scraped it somewhere in the tunnel. His usually unruffled composure was shaken, but his expression remained one of guarded triumph. They had succeeded, after all, in extracting a trove of secrets capable of toppling a queen. Already, the riot outside thundered in greater waves. Distant flames tinted the sky orange, illuminating the outline of crooked roofs and tall spires. The gold cloaks were likely trying to quell the disturbance, but their efforts would be chaotic at best. Olenna wondered how many innocent bystanders had been swept up in the violence and felt a wave of bitterness. The realm was forever buying power with blood. She reminded herself that she had no choice. Cersei's fortress would not yield its secrets to gentler methods. This chaos was a necessary smokescreen. Breathing shallowly, she cleared her throat. "Varys," she said, her voice trembling more from exhaustion than fear. "We must remove these letters from the city. At least a few copies. If Qyburn realizes they've been stolen, he'll search every corner. We can't risk losing what we've gained." The spider nodded. "Agreed. You should leave King's Landing before dawn. They'll lock down the gates if word of this theft spreads. Some of my remaining little birds can forge duplicates while you travel. Spreading the truth is just as vital as safeguarding the originals." She clutched the satchel of scrolls, each one marked with the Lannister or Baratheon sigil, each one a weapon. "I'll depart immediately. The commotion will help me slip out unnoticed." "And where will you go?" "Back to the Reach is too dangerous," Olenna murmured. "The Lannisters roam the roads there. Dorne is an option, but that is still too far. Perhaps I'll head to the Stormlands. Some of the minor lords there once owed my house a favor. Or maybe I'll go to the Riverlands where the Tully Cuss still simmers. I haven't decided." Varys managed a wry twist of his lips, half a smile. "You are the very portrait of caution, Lady Tyrell. A wise posture given all that's at stake." She permitted herself a soft sigh. "I've lived long enough to see all sorts of betrayals. I won't walk blindly into another." A distant crash echoed outside. The riot surged, accompanied by shouts and screams. Varys moved to the cellar's entrance, peering through a crack in the boards that covered a half-rotted window. "Go now. The gold cloaks are running toward Flea Bottom. I see torches and swords. They won't be focusing on the city gates for the next hour or so. If you act quickly, you'll slip past them." Olenna pulled her hood low. Age weighed heavy on her limbs, but her mind was aflame with purpose. "May the gods protect you, Spider," she muttered. "For if you fall, these scrolls will lose half their power." He inclined his head. "And may they protect you, my lady. For if you fall, the realm loses its most cunning thorn." She felt a flicker of satisfaction, an echo of her old pride. "Indeed," she said. Then she left him in the darkness, ascending a set of crumbling stairs that opened into a narrow alley behind the brothel. She kept the satchel clutched at her side, the documents rustling with each step. Passing through the chaotic streets was a feat in itself. She took care to avoid the main thoroughfares, skirting behind ramshackle buildings, occasionally pressing herself into recessed doorways to avoid detection. A few times, she glimpsed gangs of looters ransacking market stalls or scrabbling for spilled grain. Fear and fury alike drove the city to madness. By the time she neared the gates, she was trembling with both fatigue and adrenaline. The smaller postern gate, traditionally used by traders, stood in a crooked section of the city walls. Even from afar, she could see that only one guard manned it, and he was half-turned toward the distant glow of fires. As she approached, the guard spun around, looking more harried than menacing. "Who goes there?" he demanded, voice cracking with tension. He was young, far too young for the job, his armor not quite fitted. A tuft of barely grown beard bristled under his chin. Torchlight danced in his eyes. Olenna hunched her shoulders and let her voice rasp. "Just an old woman. The city's on fire. Lord. Let me pass, please. My daughter's farm is outside the walls. I'm no threat." The guard squinted. "We've orders to watch for suspicious folk. That riot in Flea Bottom. Someone stirred it up, they say." She sniffled in a performance of trembling fear. "I don't know aught about riots. I only know I'm too frail to outrun a mob. Let me go, please." The poor lad looked torn. He raked a hand through his hair, glancing at the roiling smoke drifting above the rooftops. "All right, go," he said finally, stepping aside. "But be quick about it, Granny." Olenna gave him a quavering nod of thanks and shuffled through the gate. She did not waste another moment. Once outside, she tightened her grip on the satchel and hurried along a narrow road that curved around the city's perimeter. She heard the faint clang of the gate behind her as the guard closed it again. The city lights flickered in the distance, but she kept walking, moving away from that place of smoke and strife, heart pounding with both dread and exhilaration. When she'd put a good half-league between herself and the walls, she ventured off the road, finding a small grove of stunted trees where she had tethered a patient old mare earlier in the day. She had purchased the horse under a false name, paying well above its value to avoid questions. The animal greeted her with a soft snort, stamping the ground. Olenna fumbled in her cloak for a piece of apple she tucked away and offered it to the mare with a shaky hand. "Well done, girl," Olenna whispered as she patted the mare's neck. "Now we ride, as far from this madness as we can manage." Mounting with difficulty, for her joints still ached, she guided the horse onto a lesser-known trail leading north. She chose north rather than east or south, recalling that the Gold Cloaks often patrolled the major roads that led to the Crownlands or Stormlands. The area to the northwest was more rural, dotted with small hamlets that might offer shelter. She had not entirely decided her final destination, but her immediate goal was to put many leagues between herself and King's Landing before dawn. Night embraced her with cold arms. The air smelled of damp earth, a relief from the reek of the city. Overhead, clouds scudded across a waning moon. Olenna pressed onward, though her eyes threatened to close and her limbs felt like lead. Every so often, she heard phantom echoes of the city's tumult behind her, but she would not stop. Only when the eastern sky began to pale did she find a small copse of twisted oaks near a muddy creek, where she could catch her breath. Dismounting, she tied the mare to a low branch. The horse drank greedily from the creek, and Olenna knelt beside the water, splashing her face. The coldness jolted her from half-sleep, and she peered at her reflection with a pang. Her eyes looked sunken, her cheeks hollow. She grimaced. "Live a little longer," she murmured to her reflection, "just long enough to see that woman's ruin." The day drifted onward. Too weary to ride further, she huddled at the base of an oak, nestling herself in the roots. Maester Thomos would have scolded her for ignoring her health, but she hardly had the luxury to rest in luxury. She tore a small portion from a loaf of stale bread, chewing with difficulty. Her mouth felt like parchment, the dryness aggravated by the memory of the poison. If only she had time to brew another dose of the antidote. Perhaps when she reached a safer haven. Yet even as exhaustion pulled at her, she needed a plan. She had an entire satchel of proof implicating the Lannisters in atrocities that would scandalize the Seven Kingdoms. But how best to wield it? Unleashing the letters into the open all at once might cause a frenzy, but also risk some being dismissed as forgeries or overshadowed by Lannister propaganda. Better to release them strategically so each revelation struck like a separate hammer blow. A part of her wished she could stand before the Iron Throne, toss the parchments at Cersei's feet, and watch her squir. But she wasn't fool enough to believe that would end well. No, this called for cunning. She let her eyes drift shut, conjuring images of potential allies. The Tullus might be sympathetic, but their power was broken since the Freys seized Riverrun. Still, the remnants of their house and supporters might seize any chance to undermine the Lannisters. The new Warden of the North, whoever that might be with all the recent upheavals, could also be crucial. And of course, the Iron Bank's involvement could tilt the tide, for if Cersei lost the Iron Bank's support, her armies would starve. Clutching the satchel, Olenna forced herself to rest, if only for a few hours. She dozed fitfully, plagued by dreams of Marjorie trapped beneath a collapsing sept, flames licking at her gown, the stench of burning flesh. More than once, Olenna woke with a jolt, staring wildly at the trees around her until she remembered where she was. Her only solace was the knowledge that she was no longer helpless. She finally possessed the means to deliver justice, or vengeance, or both. By late afternoon, she remounted and continued onward, winding through the countryside. She avoided villages, stopping only at remote farms where she might beg water or oats for the horse under her guise as a weary grandmother traveling to see distant kin. Some folk were wary, especially with so many refugees about, but the sight of her age and the small coin she offered eased their suspicions. Around dusk, she reached a fork in the road. One path led west toward the Riverlands, the other curled north, eventually connecting with a major route that led to Harrenhal. Memories of the castle's bleak silhouette haunted her, but it was a crossroad for many travelers. If she could make it near Harrenhal, she could then slip west to seek out Tully loyalists. The risk lay in whether the Freys or their Lannister friends still kept a strong presence in that region. A sudden rustling in the underbrush made her stiffen. She halted the mare and peered into the gloom. A moment later, a lean figure in ragged clothes emerged, brandishing a rusted sword. His eyes were wild with desperation. Behind him, another figure crouched, a smaller woman with a knife. Highwaymen or desperate peasants turned brigands. Olenna's heart hammered. "Stay where you are," the man barked. "Food, coin, anything you got worth taking. Hand it over." Olenna swallowed, instinctively hugging the satchel. "I have little," she said, forcing her voice to tremble. "Only a few coins and old bones." "You do better to rob a merchant." The man advanced, sword trembling in his hand. "I don't care if you're old or not. I see that cloak, that horse better than we got. Must mean you've something valuable." His gaze flickered to the satchel, suspicion kindling in his eyes. Olenna's pulse thudded. She couldn't afford to lose the documents. Her mind raced as she tried to think of a ploy, some way to talk them out of this. But the woman behind him hissed, "Hurry, Oren. Let's just do it. Take what she's got." Desperate, Olenna blurted, "I have food. A loaf of bread. Oats. Not much, but enough to stave off hunger. I can give you that." Oren sneered. "Bread? We need coin." "I have a few silver stags," Olenna said, fumbling in her cloak's hidden pocket. Her fingers closed around 3 silver coins. She held them out, letting them catch the dying light. "Take them. And the bread. That's all I can spare." The man hesitated, greed and caution at war in his expression. Eventually, he snatched the coins. "That satchel too." "No," Olenna said sharply, then softened her tone to a trembling plea. "Please, it contains letters for my family, sentimental things. They're worth nothing to you. Just old parchment." He took a step closer, sword level with Olenna's midsection. "How about that horse? We need it more than you." Her heart sank. She tried to summon her most imperious tone, though her voice trembled. "I need it to reach my family before I die. Please." For a brief moment, Oren's gaze wavered. The woman behind him was breathing hard, her eyes darting nervously around. She muttered something Olenna couldn't decipher. Oren pressed his lips together, then spat on the ground. "The horse is ours." Olenna's mind whirled. She realized that if they took her horse, she'd be stranded with no quick means of travel, vulnerable to any passing threat. The entire plan to expose Cersei could collapse. Desperation lit a spark in her. "If you want the horse," she managed, "at least let me walk away. I'll not fight you for it. Take the horse, the coin, and be gone." Oren eyed her once more, then lowered the sword slightly. "Fine, old crone. Toss the cloak on the ground too. That's wool in it." Her jaw tightened. She had come so far, braving Cersei's dungeons only to be robbed by common brigands. And yet she saw no better option. With shaking hands, she eased the cloak from her shoulders and dropped it at his feet. Underneath, she wore a modest brown dress, stained with travel. She gave the mare's reins a final pat of farewell, her heart twisting. Then she clutched the satchel to her chest and stepped back, forcing her old bones to remain steady. The woman snatched the cloak and rummaged in the saddlebags, pulling out the stale bread. Her eyes gleamed with triumph. Oren swung himself into the saddle, an awkward maneuver that told Olenna he was no horseman, and jerked on the reins. "Go on," then he growled at Olenna. "Get out of here before I change my mind." She offered no retort, merely turned and trudged away along the road. Her limbs trembled with shock. The lumps in the road's gravel prodded her thin shoes, and the night air bit at her now exposed arms. She heard the horse's hoofbeats recede behind her and suppressed a sob of frustration. It felt as if she'd lost everything again. But at least she had kept the satchel of letters. The thought that it was all that mattered flitted across her mind like a desperate mantra. After a few hundred paces, she chanced to look over her shoulder. The brigands were gone, already disappearing into the encroaching darkness. She was alone on the dusty road, no cloak, no horse, and night was falling fast. Her stomach twisted with hunger and dread. But she had survived worse. The Lannisters had failed to kill her, and she would be damned if she let a pair of opportunistic thieves end her story now. Gritting her teeth, she pressed forward, praying to the Seven for some stroke of mercy to guide her feet. She would walk through the night if she had to, though her old bones screamed in protest. Hours passed in a painful blur, her knees threatened to buckle, her back ached, and the cold nipped at her skin. She clutched the satchel under one arm, occasionally placing her free hand against a tree trunk or leaning on a rock to catch her breath. At length, the sky began to lighten. Dawn found her stumbling into a small clearing where the road diverged around a wide, slow-moving river. There, she spotted a dilapidated ferry station, a shack perched near the water with a rickety dock jutting out. Her heart leapt at the possibility of crossing the river without having to trudge miles upstream in search of a safer ford. Approaching cautiously, she called out in a wavering voice, "Hello? Is anyone here?" No answer. The shack's door was ajar, revealing disarray inside, fallen shelves, scattered debris, the musty smell of abandonment. A faded sign above the door read "Ferry Service" in crooked letters. The ferry itself was nowhere to be seen. She swallowed back her disappointment. The rope that once guided the ferry across the river had snapped and trailed in the murky water. No sign of the ferryman. Perhaps he had fled the war. Perhaps bandits had attacked him. Either way, there was no help here. She tested the dock, found it stable enough, and sat at the edge to dip her blistered feet into the cool water. The relief was immediate, and she hissed a sigh of gratitude at the sensation. As she rested, she rummaged in her satchel for any morsel of food. There were only the precious letters, each folded and sealed. No provisions. Her stomach growled, but at least she had water from the river. She cupped her hands and drank carefully, hoping the current was clean enough not to sicken her. With each swallow, she felt a flutter of returning strength. Time slipped by. The sun climbed higher, warming the air. Olenna contemplated her next move. She could attempt to walk along the river's edge until she found a bridge or another ferry. But the distance might be considerable, and she had already pushed her endurance to a breaking point. Her body threatened rebellion with every breath. She needed rest, sustenance, and perhaps a walking stick to ease the burden on her knees. At length, she forced herself upright and hobbled toward the ferry shack. Inside, she found little but dusty cobwebs. The back room contained a broken chair, a moldy blanket, and scraps of rope. Carefully, she leaned the chair against the wall, testing whether she could use one of its wooden legs as a makeshift cane. With some effort, she wrenched a leg free, stout and splintered at the end, but it would do. Before leaving, she tore a strip of the moldy blanket to drape over her shoulders. It was filthy, but it offered some barrier against the chill. Such indignities weighed on her pride, yet preserving her strength was paramount. Clutching the satchel, she stepped back onto the dock, shading her eyes against the sun's glare. A distant sound pricked her ears, hooves on the road, coming from the south. Fear jolted through her. Would it be more bandits? Or Lannister soldiers? She hastened to hide behind the shack, peering around the corner. The sound grew louder until a horse and rider emerged from a grove of trees. Another figure followed, then another. She counted 3 riders, all wearing battered leather. They were not clad in gold cloaks or the bright sigil of any major house. Possibly sellswords or mercenaries. Olenna shrank back, praying they would ignore the deserted ferry station. But to her dismay, the riders reined in their mounts and surveyed the shack. One of them called out, "You think we can rest here, sire?" The tallest among them dismounted, removing his helmet to reveal a deeply lined face. "Might as well. My horse needs watering, and we could do with some shade. The ferry's gone, though." A third rider, a woman with close-cropped hair, muttered something Olenna couldn't catch. The group approached the shack, leading their horses. Olenna clutched her satchel to her chest, panic beating in her throat. She considered running, but her legs felt like lead. Hiding was the only option. She clung to the back wall, trying not to breathe too loudly. The riders tied their horses near the dock, letting them drink from the river. Voices drifted through the warped boards of the shack. Olenna realized they were speaking in subdued, weary tones. One complained of the war's endless brutality. Another cursed the Lannisters for seizing all the harvest. The woman spat and said, "I'd get a lion if I had the chance." These were no loyal subjects of Cersei. After a moment, the tall man wandered around the shack's perimeter, presumably to relieve himself. Olenna pressed her back against the wall, heart-thrumming. He appeared at the corner, nearly bumping into her. For a tense instant, they locked eyes, his dark with surprise, hers with apprehension. He reached for the hilt of a dagger on his belt, but did not draw it immediately. "Seven save me," he murmured, "there's an old woman here." The others rushed over, weapons half-drawn. Olenna held up a trembling hand. "I mean no harm," she managed. "I'm alone. Only trying to rest." The tall man's posture relaxed minutely, though he kept his hand near the dagger. "Who are you? And why skulk about like a thief?" Olenna's throat felt parched. She considered lying, but they already seemed unfriendly toward the Lannisters. Maybe the truth, at least a portion of it, would serve her better. "My name is not important," she said carefully. "I'm fleeing the war. I was robbed on the road. Lost my horse." She gestured weakly to her ragged appearance. "I only wish to cross the river and find safety." The woman with close-cropped hair eyed her suspiciously. "You're far from any safe place. The war's everywhere." A squat, bearded man stepped forward, his tone gentler. "Where do you hail from, grandmother?" Olenna let a tremor creep into her voice. "I was from the Reach," she said, which was not untrue. "It's no longer safe there. The Lannisters burned my family's holding." That, too, had more truth than falsehood. "I tried to slip through King's Landing, but it's an inferno of trouble. I aim to get to the Riverlands, perhaps. Or any place free of the lions." Silence hung between them for a moment. The tall man finally released his dagger hilt. He cast a glance at his companions and then said, "We're Sellswords, or we were. War's not been kind to us either. We heard rumors of bandit packs roaming these parts, so we stick together." He swept his gaze over Olenna, noting her unsteady stance and the makeshift cane. "You don't look like a threat, old woman." Olenna's lips twitched in a wry, almost smile. I assure you, I'm not. Then she added, if you're heading north or west, perhaps we could travel together. I have nothing to pay you with but safety in numbers. The woman snorted. We usually don't take on strays. But the bearded man shrugged. She's no burden. On foot, though. Slows us down. I'm old, not crippled, Olenna retorted, bracing on her cane. I can keep up. The tall man ran a hand over his short-cropped hair. You're lucky we have no reason to leave you behind. But if you try anything, we'll not hesitate to defend ourselves. Understood. She nodded. I have no quarrel with you. Carefully, she kept the satchel angled away from their prying eyes. I only want to avoid the lions. One by one, the trio introduced themselves. The tall man was Bertrand, formerly a hedge knight. The bearded fellow was Walter, a soldier who'd deserted a broken cause. The woman, Tisa, said little, but her scowl spoke volumes of her distrust. Together, they led Olenna back around the shack. She explained that the ferry was gone, forcing them all to consider the next route. Better to ride north until we find a crossing, Bertrand decided. There's an old stone bridge another 10 or 12 miles upriver. Let's see if it still stands. And so Olenna found herself trudging alongside 3 battered Sellswords, forging an uneasy alliance. Their horses plodded slowly enough that she did not fall far behind, though her feet protested every stone in the path. She tried to glean information as they traveled, what news they had of the realm, of the Lannisters' movements, or rumors of the broader war. Walter proved the chattiest. He told her that the Lannisters were stretched thin, chasing insurrections across the Crownlands. Many lesser lords had grown resentful, especially with the Crown's relentless demands for food and coin. At the mention of King's Landing, the man's mouth twisted. I heard about some riot in Flea Bottom 2 nights past. Could be a sign folk have had enough. Then again, it could be just another day in that pit. Olenna tucked that bit of confirmation away. Her staged riot had indeed reverberated beyond the city. With luck, it had bought her enough time to vanish with the incriminating letters. She asked if they had encountered any Tully men in the Riverlands. Walter shrugged. A few holdouts, maybe. The Freys tried to crush them, but with the Freys themselves in disarray these days, who knows? That region's a damn patchwork of feuds. By late afternoon, they came upon the old stone bridge, arching over a sluggish bend in the river. Remarkably, it stood intact, though lichen stained its sides, and the mortar looked precarious. Bertrand dismounted to test the structure, leading his horse step by step. The stones held. We'll cross one at a time, he said. Safer that way. Tisa volunteered to take watch on the far side, so she and her horse went first. Then Walter followed. When it was Olenna's turn, her knees trembled at the thought of crossing such a narrow, crumbling span. The drop to the water below was not too high, but the current looked strong enough to sweep her away if she fell. Still, she steeled herself, placing each foot carefully. She held her cane in one hand, the satchel clutched tightly in the other, refusing to let it out of her sight. The stones were damp, perhaps from morning dew or a recent drizzle, and her worn shoes slipped once, making her heart leap. Tisa, waiting on the far side, regarded her with impatience. At last, Olenna stepped onto the grassy bank, releasing a shaky breath. The final crossing was Bertrand and his mount. Once all were safely across, the group ventured onward. They decided to make camp in a stand of trees not far from the bridge as nightfall approached, and traveling in the dark risked running into more brigands. Before the sun dipped below the horizon, Tisa went hunting and returned with 2 small rabbits. Walter built a modest fire, and the trio set about cooking a meager meal. Olenna settled herself on a fallen log, her feet throbbing. Though she longed to keep watch over her satchel personally, she also knew it would rouse suspicion if she never let it out of her grasp. She pretended to nod off briefly, but clutched the satchel in her lap. No one attempted to take it, though she felt Tisa's gaze linger more than once, clearly curious about what was so important to the old woman. Over the crackle of the fire, Bertrand mentioned rumors of a sizable force somewhere in the west, possibly men loyal to House Lannister returning from a campaign. Olenna's heart twitched at the news. If the Lannisters were marshalling their might, perhaps they sensed the realm slipping through their fingers. She hoped that in King's Landing, Varys was already forging duplicates and sending them out through his network. The more the truth spread, the shakier Cersei's seat on the throne would become. As darkness thickened, the group decided on watch shifts. Tisa offered to take the first, muttering that she trusted no one enough to sleep yet. Walter and Bertrand soon dozed on bedrolls, leaving Olenna to huddle in her own corner of the clearing. She was grateful for even a flicker of companionship, for a shared fire to keep the cold away. Still, she missed the comfort of traveling by litter or carriage. Such luxuries were no longer hers. She tried to console herself that this was temporary, that soon, if the gods were merciful, she would find a safe refuge where she could begin to distribute her evidence. Sleep was fitful again, haunted by nightmares. Marjorie's face floated before her eyes, pale and sorrowful. In the dream, her granddaughter reached out through a wall of green flame, lips forming a silent plea. Olenna woke with a gasp, tears on her cheeks, the fire reduced to embers. Tisa still sat nearby, gaze scanning the darkness. She didn't acknowledge Olenna's distress, and Olenna was grateful for that small mercy. At dawn, they ate a scant breakfast of leftover rabbit and stale biscuits. The travelers broke camp, heading further west into the Riverlands. The terrain shifted gradually, the rolling hills dotted with the blackened skeletons of farmhouses burned in past conflicts. The scars of war lay everywhere, fields gone fallow, charred wagons, battered signposts. Crows circled overhead, ever watchful. Olenna felt a pang at the sight. Once, the Riverlands had been lush, though prone to invasions. Now it was a graveyard of broken hopes. They traversed an abandoned village by midday. No sign of life, not even a stray dog. Roofs had collapsed, and a battered sept stood with its doors torn off the hinges. Tisa cursed under her breath as they passed. Walter murmured something about how the war had done this. Bertrand spat. It's the lions, or the wolves, or one of those damn armies. All the same to the small folk in the end. Olenna moved quietly, heart heavy. She recalled with bitterness how Tywin Lannister had once ravaged these lands in his war against the Starks and Tullus, and how the horrors had only multiplied with each new turn of events. The red of the Lannister banner might as well have been painted in the blood of peasants. That evening, they made camp near a shallow stream. As they sat around the fire, quietly gnawing on dried meat, Tisa finally directed a question at Olenna. You said you were from the Reach. Why leave there for these blasted lands? Olenna feigned a tired shrug. Nowhere is safe anymore. Heard the Riverlands might be a place to hide. Fewer Lannisters, or so I hoped. She made sure her voice trembled with a credible mix of dread and resignation. Tisa raised an eyebrow, clearly suspicious. You have the bearing of someone used to finer things. I don't believe you were just a farmhand or smallfolk. Who are you really? Walter and Bertrand exchanged glances, but neither spoke. Olenna realized Tisa's distrust might escalate if she didn't offer some plausible tale. She inhaled slowly, meeting the younger woman's gaze. I once served a noble family, she said, choosing her words with care. I was their housekeeper for decades. But that house was destroyed, its castle taken by the Lannisters. I fled with whatever I could salvage, mostly letters, legal documents, genealogies. Pointless to most, but precious to me. They're all that remained of those I served. The half-truth came easily, and Tisa's posture eased slightly, though doubt still lingered in her eyes. So those letters in your satchel belong to a dead house? A dead house can still hold secrets, Olenna murmured, letting just a hint of steel slip into her tone, secrets the Lannisters wouldn't want known. So I guard them carefully. If you're wise, you'll let me be. That final statement, quiet yet firm, seemed to quell Tisa's curiosity. The woman turned her attention back to the fire. Do what you want, she muttered. Just don't drag us into your troubles. Olenna gazed into the flames, her mind churning. At least Tisa had not demanded to see the letters. And if the three cells' words believed her story even partially, they might remain content with traveling alongside her, less likely to pry. If she had to slip away from them eventually, she would. But for now, their company provided an element of safety she sorely needed. Morning came with a hazy sky, as though a thick veil of clouds was trying to blot out the sun. They set off again, forging deeper into the war-ravaged landscape. Day by day, Olenna's legs grew more accustomed to walking, though her joints protested each sunrise. Bertrand occasionally scouted ahead to check for bandits or broken bridges. Walter regaled them with stories from his soldiering days, tales of incompetent lords and near mutinies. Tisa listened silently, a permanent frown etched on her face, as if she disapproved of everything and everyone. On the fourth day of their journey together, they crested a small rise and saw, far below, the wide flow of the Trident River. At the spot where the path curved down, there stood a makeshift encampment, smoke curling from cook fires. Banners fluttered in the breeze, plain cloth, no sigils. A small army or a large band of soldiers had claimed the road. Olenna's stomach clenched. They had to pass the spot unless they made a large detour, which her legs might not survive. Bertrand cursed under his breath, raising a spyglass to survey the scene. After a moment, he lowered it, grim-faced. They're sellswords, I think, or possibly outlaws. At least 50 of them. We can't skirt around them easily. The road is pinned between the river and steep ground. Tisa gripped her reins. We turn back. We'll find another route. But Walter shook his head. That could mean adding a week to our journey, maybe more. We're low on supplies as it is. Olenna felt her heart pound. If these men blocked the way, they might discover her satchel or demand a toll. She waited for someone to suggest a plan. After a long pause, Bertrand finally said, "Perhaps we can approach cautiously under a flag of truce. They may let us pass if we pay a small toll. Or they may rob us blind," Tisa countered. Olenna kept her voice calm. "If they're disciplined enough to have an organized camp, they might also be disciplined enough to prefer coin over needless bloodshed." Bertrand gave her a measuring look, then nodded. "We'll try that, but be ready to run if things go sour." They descended the slope in a careful formation. Olenna trailed behind Tisa's horse, her heart rattling with each step. At the outskirts of the camp, a pair of sentries in mismatched armor stepped forward, leveling spears. "Halt! State your business." Bertrand raised an open palm. "We're travelers heading west. We seek safe passage. We can pay a small toll if needed." One guard sneered, eyeing them. "We're the Sons of the Trident. We keep these roads safe for honest folk, for a price." "How many are you?" Bertrand gestured behind him. "Just 4, 3 riders and an old woman on foot." The second guard squinted at Olenna, who gazed at him with feigned meekness. "You'll talk to our sergeant," he said finally. "Don't try any tricks." They were herded into the camp, weaving between tents and cook fires. The place smelled of boiled cabbage, stale sweat, and unwashed bodies. But there was some semblance of order, horses tethered in a line, weapons stacked neatly by the larger tents. Men and a few women in a motley array of leather jerkins, old chainmail, and scavenged gear sized them up with blunt stares. Olenna kept her eyes lowered, the satchel hugged beneath her arm. At last, they were ushered before the sergeant. A stocky man with a bushy black beard seated on a crate. His armor was dented but of decent quality, and he wore a short sword at his side. The sentries explained the situation. The sergeant eyed Bertrand and his companions. "You're passing through our territory. For that, you pay a toll. 2 silver stags each, plus 1 more for the horses." "That'll do." Bertrand exchanged a look with Walter. 2 silver stags each wasn't a small sum, but it wasn't outrageous. "Agreed," he said, slipping coins from a pouch. Walter and Tisa did likewise. Olenna, however, felt her heart sink. She had lost her few silver stags to the earlier brigands. She had only coppers now, hardly enough. "Pay up, old woman," the sergeant demanded, extending a hand. Olenna's mind whirled. She might beg or attempt to claim she had no silver, but that could anger them. She forced a benign smile. "I'm afraid I've only coppers, good sir. I was robbed. I can pay in those, or perhaps I can offer some other service." A murmur of displeasure rippled through the nearby onlookers. The sergeant scowled. "We're no charity. You pay or you don't pass." His gaze shifted to the satchel. "What's in there? Jewels? That might cover your toll." Terror flickered through Olenna. "Just letters and mementos," she said quickly. "Worthless to anyone but me." The sergeant stood, stepping closer. "I'll be the judge of that." He reached out and Olenna backed away instinctively. "We'd appreciate leniency," Bertrand interjected, tone guarded. "She's harmless and old. Surely you have grandmothers too." The sergeant snorted. "My grandmother never came through here without paying. Stand aside. I want to see that satchel." Olenna's grip tightened. She thought frantically for some alternative. Could she talk her way out, or slip away in the confusion? The camp was too large. She wouldn't get far. Feeling the blood drain from her face, she realized she might have to let them see the letters. But that would doom her mission if they recognized the official seals or realized the explosive nature of the information. She could only imagine these mercenaries selling the documents to the highest bidder, perhaps back to the Lannisters themselves. Summoning a shaky breath, she said in a low voice, "These are personal, memorials for my lost kin. Must you pry into an old woman's sorrow?" The sergeant's expression hardened. We must. Hand it over." When Olenna hesitated, 2 of his men stepped forward, scowls on their faces. Bertrand shot Olenna an apologetic look. Walter and Tisa looked equally wary. The situation teetered on the brink of violence. Olenna's mind raced. Perhaps she could grab one of the letters that contained a lesser secret, something not lethal if discovered, and offer it to them as a sample, claiming she had nothing else of value. But the risk remained that they'd keep searching. At that moment, the flap of the nearest large tent was shoved aside, and a tall, wiry man emerged. He wore partial plate over leather, and a sword hung at his side. A battered crest on his breastplate suggested some lesser house, though the markings were too scuffed to discern. His face was lined with age, his hair gray at the temples, and he had the air of someone accustomed to command. He eyed the commotion. "Sergeant Bannon, what's all this fuss?" The sergeant turned. "These travelers are paying tolls. This old one claims she has no silver. Might be lying. She's got a bag she won't let go of." The wiry newcomer studied Olenna with a keen gaze. Then he strode forward, dismissing the sergeant with a brief wave. Approaching Olenna, he spoke in a calm but firm tone. "Show me what you carry. I'll decide if it satisfies our toll." There was something in his stance, a quiet self-assurance, that reminded Olenna of seasoned knights. She swallowed. She could sense that a refusal might provoke a far harsher response. Hand-trembling, she opened the satchel enough to expose a corner of a parchment. She prayed he wouldn't recognize the Lannister sigil. "Just letters," she repeated, voice quavering. The man reached in, and she could do nothing but watch, her heart pounding like a drum. He pulled out one scroll, flicking it open. His eyes darted over the words. Olenna held her breath. He took in the seal, the spidery script, the mention of certain names: Qyburn, Cersei, references to Wildfire. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, or at least a flicker of realization that these were no ordinary letters. But to Olenna's shock, he swiftly rolled the parchment closed before the others could get a clear look. Stepping back, he handed it to Olenna. "You speak true," he said evenly, though his voice carried an undercurrent of tension. "These are but old family records and mementos. Not worth a handful of silver, let alone coin enough to pay for her toll." He lifted his gaze to the sergeant and the curious onlookers. "I'll settle her debt from my own purse. The rest of you, disperse. Show's over." A murmur of surprise rippled through the camp. The sergeant looked incredulous, but he had the sense to nod. "If you say so, Captain." Reluctantly, the men backed away. Olenna stared at the captain, unsure whether to fear him or thank him. He reached into a pouch on his belt, withdrew a few coins, and placed them in the sergeant's outstretched hand. "Done," he said. Then to Olenna, he added quietly, "Come. We'll talk in my tent." His expression was unreadable, but it wasn't hostile. In fact, there was a glimmer of something like respect. With no other choice, Olenna nodded, clutching the scrolls close. The man gestured for Bertrand, Walter, and Tisa to remain outside, then guided Olenna through the tent flap. Inside, the air was stuffy, lit by a single lantern. A small cot, a trunk, and a makeshift table took up most of the space. Once the flap closed, the captain faced her, studying her features intently. After a moment of tense silence, he spoke in a low voice. "I recognize that handwriting, and the mention of Wildfire. I was in King's Landing the day the Great September burned. Are these correspondences of Qyburn's? Letters from the crown, discussing what exactly?" Olenna tensed, uncertain how much to reveal. "Why do you ask?" He exhaled through his nose, a slight tremor in his tone. "Because I had kin in that sept when it blew. No justice was ever done for them. If you have evidence that implicates Cersei, or Qyburn, or both, then we share an enemy." Her pulse quickened. Could it be that the gods had granted her a new ally in the unlikeliest place? "I do have such evidence," she said at last. "Enough to bring down the Lannisters if wielded correctly." "And you are?" He lifted his chin. "My name is Garenbracken, once a sworn sword to the crown before I lost everything. Now I command the Sons of the Trident. We're mercenaries, but we have our own reasons to despise the Lannisters. If your letters can truly spark an outcry against the Queen, I might be able to help you. Or we can help each other." Olenna's grip on the satchel relaxed a fraction. "What is it you want in return?" Garen's eyes hardened. "Cersei must face retribution for what happened to my family. It's that simple. And if we can gain some measure of security for ourselves, all the better. These lands have been ravaged by war for too long. Our band consists of soldiers who lost faith in any highborn cause. We defend ourselves, carve out a living. But if there's a chance to strike at the Lannisters, we'll take it, provided it's not a fool's errand." Her mind spun with possibilities. She had left King's Landing alone, hoping to reach Tully's sympathizers or other hidden pockets of resistance. Now, fate had led her to a mercenary captain who might give her the muscle she sorely lacked. Your men are formidable? A corner of his mouth tightened. We number close to 100, counting camp followers. Not enough to topple the Red Keep by force, but enough to make a difference in the right fight or to protect someone carrying dangerous information. If the Lannisters send bounty hunters after you or after those letters, you'll need protection. Olenna allowed herself a cautious nod. And you'll do this for revenge? His hand strayed to a small pendant around his neck. Partly. Also for gold, if you can promise us that. The Lannisters have deep coffers, but so did the Tyrells once. If you're who I suspect you are, you may still have access to certain funds. That gave her pause. Could he have guessed her true identity? She realized with a subtle unease that her accent, her bearing, might hint at her being highborn. But she chose her response carefully. If these letters succeed in undermining Cersei, the realm's balance could shift. Allies of the Tyrells and others would reward anyone who helps bring that about. Garen studied her, seemingly satisfied. Very well. My men won't bother you again. And I'll do what I can to help you reach whomever you need to reach in the Riverlands or beyond. His tone grew grim. But know this, if you deceive us or if this mission is hopeless, we'll cut our losses. Olenna gave a small nod. Understood. She paused, then added, thank you. For paying my toll. She held his gaze. I'm sorry about your kin in the September. A flicker of pain shadowed his features. They deserved better than to die in green flame. Then he cleared his throat, gesturing to a crude stool. Sit. Let's discuss how to use those letters most effectively. The Lannisters might come searching, sooner or later. Olenna settled onto the stool, exhausted but strangely invigorated. Fate had handed her another twist, a mercenary captain who yearned for vengeance against the Queen. Though she had always relied on cunning rather than brute force, there was a certain reassurance in having swords at her side. If used wisely, this alliance could be the next step in toppling the Iron Throne's occupant. In the dim lamplight, she and Garen spoke in hushed tones, weaving plans and possibilities. They talked of lords in the Riverlands who might be swayed, of smugglers who could ferry copies of the letters to seaports, of how best to leak the most damning evidence in a wave of revelations that would strip the Lannisters of allies. As they spoke, Olenna sensed a new clarity emerging from the gloom of her exhaustion. This was no longer a lonely mission she pursued on foot, battered by misfortune. She had stumbled upon a place to regroup, to strike back with more than words. For the first time since leaving King's Landing, genuine hope stirred in her heart like an ember fan to life. Garen was no saint, nor were his cell's words. But they had reason to loathe the Queen, and if they could be harnessed for the greater cause, so be it. She would use every tool at her disposal. By the time their conversation ended, night had fully fallen outside. Garen lent Olenna a blanket for the evening, instructing her to sleep in his tent for safety lest any of his less disciplined men bother her. He insisted that she remain discreet about the letters, warning that some among his band might have fewer scruples about selling secrets for a quick profit. Olenna, more than anyone, understood the precariousness of knowledge. She promised to keep her satchel hidden and withheld from all but him. As she lay down on a makeshift bedroll, the flicker of the lantern casting dancing shadows on the tent walls, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. So much had changed in mere days. From the gloom of King's Landing to the lonely flight into the wilderness to now being in the heart of a mercenary camp with a newfound potential ally. Her body still ached and the poison's ghosts drifted through her veins, but she clung fiercely to her purpose. She murmured a soft prayer to the seven, naming each of her lost loved ones, her children, her grandchildren, especially Marjorie. This is for you, she thought. The realm will know the truth. And the Lannisters will pay. She closed her eyes, letting the hum of night noises lull her. Tomorrow, she would begin forging the next stage of her plan, and the seeds of rebellion would take firmer root. If cunning and